winner is Donald Trump. My projection of CBS, and I think the votes are going to indicate that. And with a relatively speaking broad-based Republican coalition. Did his support ebb a little bit down the stretch? Yes, but he took on Pope Francis, another unprecedented moment in American presidential politics, or a candidate from either major party taking on the pontiff. Never happened before. He questioned openly George W. Bush's not only the invasion of Iraq, but the underlying premise of that invasion in the first place, that it may have been fraudulent. And he called Ted Cruz relentlessly a liar, and in the final days said we should boycott Apple. Now, taken all together, those are a lot of big institutions with a lot of reservoirs of either general support or deep and abiding affection. I would probably put Apple near the high end of the affection category, but nevertheless, it didn't do anything other than maybe diminish some of Trump's support. So he remains the formidable frontrunner for Republicans as this nomination process moves forward. Does he get the delegate haul that he might have liked if he had wiped the table? No. But in all likelihood, he wasn't going to wipe the table here anyway. Ted Cruz was always going to be close, and so Marco Rubio's a closer third. Picking up on the conversation we were just having about Rubio, so what's the theory for Rubio? Does he ever win anywhere? I mean, that's a question we always ask Terry Sullivan, his campaign manager. Hey, are you guys ever going to win anywhere? Is third place always the really great thing for Rubio? And his philosophy right now still is, it's not about winning, it's about not losing. And we have to not lose long enough so we stay in the game, and then we can win. Okay, that theoretically holds up until it doesn't. I've never really seen a presidential campaign based on a premise that lasts very long of not winning until you win. Yeah. At some point, you got to win.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the interesting things is what didn't happen here tonight. I have felt from the beginning, if Donald Trump won an overwhelming victory here tonight, I think it would be virtually impossible to stop him from getting the Republican nomination. If he had won, you know, by 20 points or something like that tonight, the question you'd ask, well, who's going to beat him? Because nobody has. But I think what we're seeing tonight is what has become a three-man race. And I think the fact that he won by what, 5 or something? We don't know, 5 points at least, probably. That's good, but it's not great news for Donald Trump. He said he'd be happy with winning by just 1 vote. But that's what people always say when they don't meet expectations. But I think the important thing for Republicans down the road is he did not win by such a large margin that he would just be unstoppable from here on in. I think when you're in a three-man race like this, maybe he wins, maybe he doesn't, but he's not unstoppable.
Right, and there's one factor in all of these expectations games that Donald Trump never has to weigh. He never has to stay awake at night saying, what are my donors going to think? He doesn't have any. Donald Trump doesn't have any. He doesn't need to worry about expectations or falling in any range where his funders become anxious or nervous or start getting him on the phone and saying, hey, what are your pollsters saying? Why are you tactically doing this? He lives completely free of that kind of rather typical presidential political anxiety. So that makes a victory in a different sort of category, I think, for Trump, because expectations are for other people. And he always sort of says that. Expectations are your ball game. My ball game is winning, and I guarantee, my hunch is when he comes out tonight, he's going to say, I won. A win's a win, and we're going to win again, and we're going to keep winning. And so for the Trump people, that's a reinforcing message along the way.
I think this is also a big deal for Marco Rubio. I mean, you know, he really stumbled, and he has obviously come back, whether that's the attack ads he was using, whether people just like the message he's been giving, but he's in much better shape tonight than he was a couple of weeks ago.
It's interesting, been watching Rubio on the campaign trail here this week in South Carolina. There was something, I think, Bob, and I'm sure you've seen this in presidential campaigns, liberating about that stumble that Rubio went through. It was a shocking moment for him. He'd never done it before in his public life. And he realized he was fallible, and he came to accept that fallibility. And then he went on to say, you know what, and it was kind of a message tailored for South Carolina. I'm not going to be sappy about it. There was a shrewdness to it. But saying, look, I'm ready for whatever God has in store for me here. Now, that definitely plays well in South Carolina. But whatever the shrewdness of that message was, I do think there was something internally resonant. Rubio crashed and burned on that debate stage in New Hampshire, worse than he had ever done before in this campaign or his public life. And then he got up the next day, and he kept campaigning on, and he pretended for 2.5 days that it didn't matter. Then the voters told him, yes, guess what, it did matter. And then he had to look the voters in the eye and say, it was my fault. I blew it, I let you down. And I think there has been something renewing for him about going through this process.
Yeah. I think that, another thing we ought to talk about, I think, is Ted Cruz. What was it in New Hampshire? He only got 9% of the vote that did not identify itself as evangelicals. He comes in here, a lot of evangelical voters here. Obviously, that's where his strength was. His strength runs very deep with evangelical voters.
Absolutely.
His challenge going into these next primaries, can he broaden that support to other groups? That's clearly the core of his support. But does his support go much beyond that? We'll find out as we go down the road, but I think that's the challenge for him.
And I would say this about Ted Cruz. Nobody in this campaign is more capable or devoted more resources or more money to identifying their most likely voter, identifying them down to a T, and then moving them to the ballot box when necessary. They have a continuous loop of communication and reinforcement, and that makes him competitive, and that will keep him competitive in a lot of places. Ted Cruz has the money to carry on. After tonight, Marco Rubio will get more money to carry on. Donald Trump has his own bank account to carry on. Jeb Bush, I don't think, will. And John Kasich is going to have to try to find a way to persuade donors who are not ready to go to Rubio to give him a long look and maybe open up their checkbooks.